any kind of shape, it could be any kind of dynamic. Action. And that's what I feel that's what Anne is talking about when she wants stillness to mean something that continues to be dynamic, continues to be alive, expressive. Yes. And how it comes out, if it's increased more or if it reverberates a little, I mean, what you demonstrated to me, I would deal with in terms of phrasing of that dynamic. And children could have lots of choices in that. But I would express it in the motif in a different kind of way than putting a becoming sign on the whole sign. Yeah. I would express it in a different way.
But what would you do to show that there's a cessation of movement? See,
the pause sign is enough for me. If we're talking about some kind of dynamic energy that you want to create and develop in your children, then we're going to talk about that. But it's not something that's going to be hooked to symbolically to the pause sign. Or I would use an effort symbol in the pause sign. I mean, I would put a slash across it like a nothing sign. You know, I mean, I wouldn't choose to put a becoming sign on the rabbit ear sign. That's all I'm saying, is that I think I've been trying for lots of years to understand Anne's use of the term, and I just feel like I know exactly what she's talking about in terms of teaching children and not wanting them to just die in the process of it. But I just go about doing that in a different kind of way, and perhaps using a different kind of symbol, connection within the system.
You write something during the pause. During the and write something extra.
Well, perhaps, or but on one level, as Charlotte said, I just have always felt that the pause sign gives you the freedom to hold on to whatever intent you had and whatever dynamic intent, meaning whatever kind of movement was coming before you. Yeah. I mean, if it's a forward sign or if it's a turn sign or whatever.
Charlotte, let me just say one thing to Janet. I think you're talking about not conflating actions with effort or with dynamics.
Yeah.
Is that right? This is a concept, I think, that's kind of behind some of this stuff. Maybe are we trying
to? Because Anne would say, but I think what Anne is asked, I'm putting words in your mouth, is that stillness is not necessarily just about attitudinal, dynamic things. You could have stillness that's about you're continuing to have a sensation of being small. You're continuing to have a sensation of traveling. I traveled somewhere. I continue. It's not limited, am I right? To stillness, to quality. I'm trying to find out.
Not limited to dynamic types.
Right.
Okay. Right. And the other question.
So, I mean, I think it's a useful symbol. Yeah. Right. Maybe it's a different.
The problem. I mean, we don't want to get into this, but there are grammatical problems with using and with using the same symbol for maintaining. You get and. And the question again is how would one write that there's a cessation of movement without saying that the stillness is relevant? There are times you don't they stop moving, but it doesn't matter whether you're still or you're pausing. All I want to say is there's no movement. Leave a gap. That's what I do. But what I understand is Jan would say a gap by default means stillness because
not necessarily.
Okay, then that's what I was asking.
No, kind of the reverse. A gap just means stop, but if you put a pause sign on there, it means more than a gap.
Okay, so you two are closer than I thought.
Yeah. I just don't need to have rabbit ears on it.
And please. But then the problem that circle is a sign for retain.
Exactly.
And if you had lowered, and now you're going to travel, and you want to retain the lowering, you put the whole sign, nothing to do with stillness, and you travel, and then you have to cancel that in order to come up again.
You have to write the following.
Or if for some reason you've got a fist, and you want to hold Baptist during the generals. You put whole time for that, and then you have to
Let's say you do, can you see I'm not getting up the right? I mean, does this
We
mean,
can't see that.
Right on the whole-
yeah, do you put an arm, okay. Does it,
Are all of those
anyway,
words?
we're getting away from the chart, by getting into the theoretical why, and, you know.
Erase that.
It's
You know
at least
what,
on the video.
Jimmyle, we're getting into theoretical discussion of a particular thing.
It's on the videotape.
This is what I was thinking.
We don't need to do that, but we've established,
Yeah.
we may even be closer than we thought. You know?
That's right, it's so
That's
cool.
So,
Do you want to move on? Probably the dinner's coming.
Dinner?
Can we order?
Yeah,
What we thought we'd do, before we move on to another topic, I brought
Control room. Eileen, you want to follow up on something
Yes.
here?
The idea of the gap. At one point, we said that meant cessation of movement, and we also said it meant cessation of movement with internal expression. Is there anybody at this table who uses that second meaning? Then I'm going to take this off and put this same symbol, same meaning, it's cessation of movement.
Janice isn't sure.
Oh,
Oh, see, I was one who just, based on what you said right before the break, I interpreted what you said as that you were seeing that just as cessation.
all right.
You put new in there.
I'm putting
Yeah.
it with a question mark in parentheses, and we'll keep it on the chart, and we'll see what feedback we get from people who aren't here.
that's good.
And we make fun.
Okay.
You may be quoted later on.
Whatever you decide.
Yes.
I would use it that way in the score.
With the gap? The gap?
But outward flow
Would you hold a moment?
Intentional expression.
You specifically, when you use outward flow.
Wait a minute,
There's
outward
a
flow
gap
means
in the
something
score,
else.
but not
You don't use the word flow with LMA.
Don't use outward flow.
Wait.
Very
This is
important.
part of the difference, though.
Yeah.
This is the vocabulary that we're using on this side of the table, so you don't necessarily tell me not to use it, because then that becomes part of the conversation, what does it mean to us?
Yeah. No,
That's a good
When I heard that, I thought, oh boy, well, that's a very interesting way to, in that gap.
You guys have comment on what happened?
Yeah.
Because that's, am I correct, Ann?
Say again.
Yeah.
You know, I think
It's
I
Say it again.
It's sensation movement, but it's with a continued outward flow.
A whole song by itself?
No,
The
the
energy.
stillness.
The stillness sign,
Stillness sign.
yes.
Because it's like when Ann was describing earlier, like especially in ballet context, when you're writing ballet, and you're like, let's say she's doing an extended time for a promenade.
Right.
Okay, it's sometimes very important that the energy for her, I mean, you can write, it all comes to interpretation, but if the choreographer or the stager is specifically saying, I really need you to keep growing during this promenade so that by the end, it becomes this, then something is happening. She's in an arabesque. The notation shows a gap of movement, but the intention, her energy is continuing to grow and change during the length of that promenade, and it finishes, in effect, as something other than what it started as.
I think
Does that
that's
make
a
sense?
special application. You're describing a special application. I mean, the very basic, simple idea, without putting it in any particular context, is, well, in the Your Move book, I quoted Agnes Jimmyle. This was a wonderful quote, that stillness is not a deadness, an emptiness, not existing. Anyway, she used some other words, which that idea of dead, nothingness, and so that's why I thought, yes, because there's something energy going out.
That's what I want to say. The energy thing is something that we all look at, and we all see a lot, and try to describe it, and do it in our program too. Somebody will say something about bartending fundamentals, and we don't really recognize and discuss it, but it's there. And then when we get stuck, we're talking about energy, but we don't really talk about energy. So
energy is implicit in the idea
I
of
think
stillness.
that's what part of the disagreements are in this particular symbol. is in the use of energy or in the non-use of energy, and how it's
notated.
yeah, what we
It sounds like people have an idea, the basic agreement about what the ideas are, but the question is how to notate it.
Yeah, Kris, did you have a comment?
Well, I just have a question about, Sandra, what you were describing. Wouldn't you have the gap, but then you would have symbology to the side of that gap describing this increasing whatever, correct?
I would probably put a bracket, I mean, it's hard to say, but I'd probably have a bracket on the outside with
So
the
there's a
stillness and
modification
an
of
action.
that gap, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, but it would be outside and separate.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
You already
Yeah, I think that,
deflection.
yeah, I just would add that what happens in terms of the definitions is that your definition brings up for us the use of those words. For instance, Marion North, outward flow and inward flow of movement is a whole LMA concept, which has nothing to do with keeping your energy going during a stillness, but it's very specific about outwardly flowing versus inwardly flowing movement. And I don't, from my perspective, I don't think that you're only meaning that the movement should flow outward, because you might have a stillness in which the movement would be flowing inward.
So this is
And
another
so
one to add
that's,
here.
I mean, so to define it with an outward flow of movement would be, for me, not too limiting.
Inward flow.
You know, I mean,
Well, that's why you thought that the visually like symbol does not work for you.
Yeah, but when it comes to talking,
Well, that's another thing, but also the words of
I
defining
see
it.
words, specific usage.
You're
So like I
right.
see specific instances of usage. So in this particular instance, it was outward flow.
Right.
And rather when I would have maybe said inward flow,
Right, and so
the movement.
Right, so the whole
Right.
idea is defining the term with a term that's already defined as something else. For me, it's like, oh, wait a minute.
But don't you all think that we have to keep going back to the symbols because the English or the German or the Spanish or whatever is going to always lead us these ways? But we can't edit. We can't say that word belongs to them, so we won't use it. We have to all be able to use it.
So what I've done here is I put up the word flow,
Yeah.
and in our other column, I put same word, different meaning. This isn't symbol, this isn't,
Yeah.
But then you also have that symbol of inward flow. In the north, do you know what the symbol is?
yeah, but I don't think that's an issue. I think it's just an issue of terminology.
Well, also, I
The
think
word.
that the B, it's not really a B, it's very wide. No, okay, it comes from sequential. What does that connote?
Right.
Or denote? And what I hear Jan saying is that because it means, it has the meaning of increasing, for her, it's not the appropriate symbol necessarily. But visually somehow.
I'm not with you on what I need to write here. I've written this symbol,
Right,
and I've written increasing,
right.
and what else? What else does that symbol mean? Something different? Is that what you're saying?
Doesn't, well, in lava notation, it doesn't mean increasing. It's an outward sequence.
Sequential. Successive.
But then if we do agree on a stillness symbol, and we do agree that there is such thing as an outward and an inward flow, then should we have a symbol also showing inward flow
Yes,
stillness?
this has been suggested by people.
That was the first one.
Then what do you write?
Out like a dumpster.
Then what do you write when you want? Then what do you want to write when you say there is a cessation of action with expressivity? There's stillness, but I don't want to tell you whether it's inward or outward, or even maintain. You
I would rather
know,
modify the
Show
stillness
it.
symbol and let the stillness symbol just be the basic idea
Me too.
of
Expressiveness.
Me too.
You're at the beginning, you are laying down your alphabet, your basic, and you don't go into all that detail.
Well, it's not, that's the point. What should be the symbol that does not
Indicate
indicate
an extra component added to
Right.
it. Yeah.
Right.
But do you think Marion North has a symbol for inward flow?
Well, the only way she ever, the only way I know, and I don't know this
Okay.
for sure, certainly at this point, but, I mean, in the old days, what she used to do is make these diagonal slashes
source that type of source.
You don't have a sense of the source?
It was, a lot of it was done within her effort writing on the horizontal, and
In that
it was
one
within the
book?
context of her,
In her
might be a
book.
personality assessment.
Personality is
Is where I think it has in that one. But
Can we move on to flexion?
We have a sense that,
This is great discussion.
Does everybody agree that flexion is written this way?
No. Any,
That would be too easy.
this symbol means any form, and that means any form of a small, of a small amount of flexion. A double X with a symbol, an ad-lib symbol means any form of, any form of a great amount of flexion. So what is needed, and what Anne has again come up with, brilliantly in my mind, is a way to show any form, any amount of any form of flexion. This symbol, you know, it does not just mean flexion. It means a certain amount of any form of flexion.
So what's the new one?
well, the problem is that with a basic sign you begin to get into detail. It makes it much harder to learn. Anyway, the sign is, write up the sign that's there, please, Jimmyle.
I'll try.
Okay. Now, at the bottom part, within that bottom area, write a small ad-lib sign.
Vertically or horizontal?
Vertical. Vertical.
And also show the old version and why it's this.
That this
Now,
is, the idea is that degrees of flexion are shown by placing dots in the top of the sign and in the bottom.
I see what you're saying.
And at first we were going to put the ad-lib sign at the top, or
all the way through.
which
No, no,
makes
another
which makes it very cumbersome.
Like a vertical one.
It's kind of cumbersome.
A little bit star.
Then we put it at the top only, but that's a problem. And then it was the question of duration. You add the duration, and is that going to be
All become
any
action.
any action? So we thought if you put the
At the
any at
bottom.
the bottom, you don't have that problem.
So this means any form, any amount of any form of flexion, i.e. flexion, and then do the same thing with extension.
Right.
The same thing, you put an extension with ad-lib and then a small ad-lib at the bottom.
Yeah.
This is just my personal opinion. I wish that we didn't have to keep adding more and more stuff to make it
Well,
simple.
But then, exactly,
What was the reason for not using my symbol of the two ad-lib signs crossing over? What
this
the
was
reason?
oh, you had a reason yourself. Right.
Instead of putting the X, put two ad-lib signs crossing.
And then how would you do it with extension? And how would you do it with extension? And that you can't just use that because it has another meaning. Now, how would you write any kind of, any,
Instead of making that straight, you make it like an ad-lib.
oh, right.
And then somebody white
So
symbol.
put it kind of top, so it really looks.
Oh.
We've discussed this a number of times.
But
I mean, I don't know what the reason
Ray,
was
could you
for
step
rejecting.
with something side, you had a reason.
You wrote, you know what? It changes the symbol so much.
It doesn't change
Yeah.
the symbol that much.
Yeah,
The
no.
two crossed lines, one's straight and one's curved. What's changing it so much?
So all that gives you is any form of extension, then you have no degree.
Well, then put the,
Well, that's what it means, any form of, any
Means
amount of any
anything-
form of a flexion. And then if you want to modify it with
sign doesn't take any degree.
The anything that's there.
Based on the symbol, that's true.
But is it
No,
flexion?
only because you say so.
Yeah,
it wouldn't
Only because you say so. If you just take that out of the meaning of the symbol, and it doesn't include that.
Right.
So this brings,
Isn't flexion or extension a matter, an infinitely divisible continuum of degrees?
yes, but you don't, when you're writing motif score or structure or whatever, for my application, I many times just want to say, do movements that get smaller or do movements that become larger, and I'm not interested in defining an amount.
Yeah, that's the beauty of having to have just the basic symbol mean that, and if you want to be really
You're talking about this symbol.
Which is the basic
But
the
that,
basic symbol without the little extra
Would you
thing in
draw
there.
it?
but then how would
Just
you?
the way it's on here. The way it's on
Oh, okay. But how would you, how then, do you then, you need to be able to do all, have
here.
the
Right, but then
family
add
symbol-
that if you really want to be like,
May I interject something also?
make it
that's come
be
up?
any
Wait.
amount of small flexion. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Add the ad lib if you want it to be more specific.
Sandra?
Oh, we've had
So
this
you don't have to
discussion.
teach too many
Yeah,
things.
we've had this discussion a lot.
Many
in
times.
Ellen-
Many times.
Many times.
We've had this discussion a lot in LN theories with Anne in the past. And one of the things that I please beg you to remember is that some of these symbols will cross over into structured LN, and we have limited amount to write in. So we can't write symbols as big as you may in a motif score because you can write it for whatever. So some of these concepts really cross over well into what we need to do, but it's also a question of then how to create a symbol that will work in an LN score where we're writing on 10 square graph paper.
This brings up the very, very important question of what are our criteria for creating and developing concepts and symbols.
Exactly.
Some people, I would be in favor very strongly of thinking in terms of motif notation and lava notation as being part of the same system. And if a symbol is going to be developed, we have to take in consideration its derivation, i.e. from lava notation. And it's really important to keep in mind not just the family of symbols that they develop in motif notation, but the whole system, i.e. lava notation and motif notation. And this is the point that you're bringing up. Not just because you need to, because of, it becomes cumbersome, but because of keeping the integrity of the system as a whole. You start to create things separately. This was, I won't go into other examples, but this is why this coming together is so important. So as symbols and LMA continue to be developed, they should take in consideration what's going on before, and the same thing for
I think that's exactly why I would rather go in favor of keeping the basic symbols, the stretch and the flexion symbols the same, rather than, because on the most basic level.
Do you mean these two?
Yes.
Or do you mean also
With the ad lib, and
Okay.
because it's as the most basic, because when you start and you want to teach people the loosest way of working at it, if you do it with the changing it and making it really complicated, then when you get into the more specific, they have to learn another whole symbol. So that's kind of why I first looked at Ray's and went, oh, nice idea, but like, oh, then if I really want to get to a little and amount and a lot, it's like they have to learn a whole new thing, and it doesn't translate to the LN as
I think it's been
rapidly.
found with teaching,
Wait,
it's been found with teaching children that this idea of learning a new symbol a little bit later is only an adult's problem.
Right.
It's no problem at all.
Oona has the floor.
Yeah, what Ray did would not work with a 3-year-old, and I have had great success working with these symbols. They can draw it.
Is that what?
But they can't make something which has a wiggly line and a straight
Then
line.
is that a criteria for developing the symbols, that we develop symbols, do not allow a symbol to be part of the default system because it's not usable for children?
How can a
I
symbol,
think it should be stop. People have their hands up in order, like Stephen Dragon at Jackie next, and then Kris.
There are a lot of people that in the process of writing will come up with making up a symbol that is very useful for all of us, but they don't necessarily have the historical lineage to know how these symbols come in order to create these symbols. So I want to just throw that out there. I don't think we should throw those symbols out because they work for us, just because they may not be in the
That's the other perspective about the other argument for what are the criteria, so you're saying what works.
Yeah.
That's a criteria.
Then Kris, then Ann.
I don't have, I'm not.
Okay, then Ray,
No,
and then.
mine's been said.
Okay, then Tina, okay, Ann.
I just wanted to mention that I was a little shocked years ago when I discovered that Charles had wanted the most basic sign with every free possibility of what could come into the picture. Yes, he was. And I said, but do we need these generic signs? Because, and this is our experience, even though we have several of them, before you know it, you're into one of the specifics. We find that our adult students don't want to have the choice. I can do any traveling, any direction, any flexion, any all of this. They want to know they're going to travel this way and the flexion is that, because it's more secure. Too much choice is mind-boggling. So, I saw the point. Yes, we need to be able to make these statements. But at the same time, I'm for let's keep it simple. So how do we?
Well, for me, simple means generic, but still,
But if your generic sign is complex, then you're in. That's exactly right.
Right. The
That's
design,
the
which is
problem.
what
Right.
Jan is saying.
Yeah.
And
No.
Ray?
No, I agree with what you said. You have to know the derivation of where the symbol came from before we come up.
Yes, if you go back to the etymology, you're more likely to stay classical and not get a lot of extra stuff added. And yet, as the language develops on so many levels, there are going to be contradictions that develop within it. That's just the nature.
It's one like Anne said, is that it's like bad improvisation and good improvisation. Bad improvisation, you do anything you want to, which is generic, anything. Good improvisation, there's some structure, you've added something.
But I must say that my experience with adults is that they're capable of creating that structure as well, and so they don't necessarily have to have that limit defined for them. So I like to have that whole continuum of specificity as well as openness with adults as well. Oh, I lost track now because I was talking. Big fan.
I would like to suggest that the two signs up on the board should not say anything about degree. Now, yes, we then have the double signs.
so what would be the, so what, so,
The base, those are the basic
those are the
signs.
basic signs, and there's one other issue,
Yes, of course there is.
and the issue is, in getting back to the other criteria, is it okay to take signs that have been established in the community as having a certain meaning? Now, this is kind of quasi, because these are relatively new, and to give them an entirely new meaning, because, I mean, I throw that out. We have these two signs which have really been kind of established with their near move, and everybody is using them to mean a certain thing. Is it okay for us to give them a new, so this is why we start developing